at least the first set of comments, is Gary London. Gary and I go back almost as much, or perhaps as much as that representative architecture. He's a development, financial, economist, advisor. I don't know. And he's been doing that for ever and ever. And has been working with the development community all that time. And I would like your perspective on where we're going, where we are, where we should be.
You get it. Where I stand.
Yeah.
It's only because I'm short. By the way, I very seldom get to speak to an audience where I'm almost the youngest in the room. So. Present. Not out. So I think I want to speak to the economy. I want to speak to demographics, and I want to talk about technology and the impact of it on the next 40 years. I will say that with all due respect to Shakespeare, past is not prologue. You know, we have a very different future. We're probably at a point in our urban region where at kind of an inflection point where I think we're going to change pretty dramatically over the coming years because we've grown up. You reminded me when I walked through the door that I've been here since 1974. I came here to go to grad school and stayed. And what hasn't changed is the weather is the same. The community sort of ethos is very similar. It's a conservative, even though we're all Democrats on the city council now, we're still a relatively conservative community in terms of our population. And we are because we're an aging community as well. I'll get to that in a minute. But if you look around San Diego from 30,000 feet down, it hasn't changed that much. So I think there's a tendency to think that the next 40 years are going to be radically different, and they may. But the last 40 years ago doesn't look to me a lot different than San Diego today. There have obviously been changes, but I think we're going to see more going forward. One big change is the air is a lot cleaner than it was when I first moved here. So we got that going for us. So my biggest concern with San Diego right now is something that you touched on, which is that we are stabilizing as a population in the region. We're double the population that we were when I first moved here, but we're pretty much at that level. We may be going down. And the reason for that is that young people that either are raising families or want to raise families can't afford the cost of living in our community. And this is a story that goes all up and down the coast, but it's pretty profound here, to the point where over the past half dozen years, we've seen a net exit, or an exodus of domestic migration. And the only reason our population is stable is because we've still had some natural increase. We've had historically more international immigration, which for reasons that are profound and evident to all of us is probably ending. So we're probably going to see a negative situation, which is in direct contrast to the 1980s and 90s and most of the last century. We had one year, Mike, I remember, when we added 90,000 population. We averaged 40 to 50,000 people in growth every year from the 1970s through the 90s. And now that story is over. And if you just want, and it's not just people leaving, it's people that are commuting. There's 47,000 people that commute daily from southern Riverside County to San Diego, congesting the I-15 in a very stressful and unhelpful way. And those are people that who have elected, these are heads of households who have elected to raise their families in southern Riverside, which is substantially less expensive in terms of housing than San Diego, but they're employed in San Diego, and they go through that stress every day. And that's a huge problem that our cities in our region, in our state, frankly, are neglecting and ought to be addressed. And one of the big problems we have in the region right now is that our county, which controls the unincorporated areas, has simply elected not to participate in the housing delivery system for all kinds of reasons, some political and some just not being aware, and this is something we're working on. In direct contrast, and I would say this whether Joe was here or not, our city council and mayor is the most housing-friendly city council we've had in decades. The problem is that you can't address the deficiency which Howard touched on. Deficiency, in my opinion, in terms of supply and demand, is over 100,000 housing units right now. You can't cure that problem through infill. We're making efforts. One of the big platforms that I've been working on is, and I visited with every city councilman and the mayor's office on this, is to do one little simple thing, which is to eliminate the minimum lot size in San Diego, which has been zoned in since 1923 in San Diego, over 100 years in San Diego. And it's time that ends, because one way to cure this exodus of families is to build today's urban version of single-family housing by way of townhomes and row homes, and slowly evolve the elimination of, not the elimination, but the decrease in emphasis of single-family homes. And so while we just saw a new plan come out, for instance, for Claremont, where they want to add 17,000 housing units, a lot of those housing units, and the plan was not wrong, are vertical urban projects. The problem is that they're ignoring the neighborhoods which were developed in the 1950s by Claire Bergner to accommodate families with children returning from World War II. And what we have the opportunity to do with the generation and to create a resurgence of young people to stay in this community is the opportunity to go into the Claremonts, take away the minimum lot size, take away single-family homes gradually as they sell, the developers buy them, and build 5 homes where 1 home existed, and maybe 15 homes where 3 homes existed. So that's a big deal. And I think the council and the mayor are going to pass this over the next year or two, and the city planning department is going to encourage this. But this is hugely important. It's way more important than ADUs and so forth. So it's so important because from an economic perspective, we have to have a growing population. We took a survey in a study that we did some years ago for the San Diego Regional Chamber of Commerce. And we hired a survey research firm to talk to CEOs and owners of companies. And we asked them the survey research version of, so what keeps you up at night? And the answer, 100% by every one of them, was our inability to retain our employees or to hire new employees. And that's not a dotted line, ladies and gentlemen. That's not a dashed line. That's a straight line between the economy and housing. It's not a housing crisis, it's a prospective economic crisis if we can't keep those people in this community and grow the young people in this community. Then we become boutique economy, kind of like a much bigger version of Santa Barbara, for instance. And if you want to know how to control growth and how to destroy an economy, just go to Detroit and take a look, or go to Cleveland. These are places that have failed, and there's some resurgence in these communities, but it never had to be that way. We don't want to go there in terms of San Diego. So we have some economic issues. Now, the upside of our economy is that we're technologically based, we're diversified economically, we still are substantially less expensive than Bay Area and Silicon Valley, LA and Orange County, as we always have been, and that's the upside. But that story could end as well. So I think these are big challenges economically for us. So I've spoken to demographics, I've spoken to economics, maybe more Q&A. And as far as technology, I think that 2 things can be true at the same time. I think we can become more urban, more vertical, more creative in terms of our city, and we will, and in terms of our architecture over the coming years. But at the same time, these major events in technology are going to profoundly change where we live and how we work. I'm an example. I work in my ADU in Point Loma. I built the house behind my house some years ago to accommodate my growing family. I'm also the world's oldest father here. I left 3 teenagers over at Liberty Station to come here this morning. And my office is in Carlsbad. There was a time up until about a month ago where I hadn't been in my own office for a year because we do video conferencing, and I don't want to commute. I just don't want to deal with it. And as we start to see a world where autonomous automobiles are going to take over, and they will. I'm usually right about the future. I'm wrong about the timing. I'm always wrong about that. So I thought autonomous automobiles were going to be a thing at this point. And I have a Tesla, and I'm scared to let it go by itself. You know, I mean, I'm going to run into a train or something. But that day is coming. And when that day comes, not only are we going to see a much more sort of urban solution to a future of San Diego, as we've been speaking of, but we're going to see a much more suburban solution. In other words, that commute isn't going to end unless we had a lot more housing on the I-15 corridor to get the county involved in allowing some smart development along the corridors, the I-15, 125, the 8, and so forth. We're going to see more and more people commute from further and further distances because while they're moving, they can treat their autonomous automobile like we treat a ride in a train today. If you're in a train, and I did this. I commuted from in an old job. I commuted from San Diego to LA a couple times a week. And when I went as I was going from Del Mar to downtown LA, I worked. I was on my computer, on my phone, and so forth. On the way back, I usually got drunk. But if you're in an auto, you can basically that's autonomous. You can be on a train without tracks. And so we're going to see a lot more pressure to build in suburban areas because people don't have that linkage between where they work and where they live anymore. And that's going to become more profound in the coming years with technology. So I think that these are some of the challenges. I will say, and I'll end this way, I will say the positive thing about San Diego going forward is that we're in the climate change Goldilocks zone. Yeah. If you look at San Diego downtown right now, half of the condominium units are owned by people whose primary address is somewhere else. Yeah. If you look at La Jolla, I hang out in La Jolla a lot, not as much as Joe does, but I hang out there because I like it. Many homes are dark. They're dark because wealthy people from around the world have moved there as a way of potentially preserving a lifestyle that's going away elsewhere in the world as it gets hotter, as more severe weather gets in place, as water rises. All those things are going to have a less profound impact in San Diego and Southern California than they are everywhere else. So we're going to continue to get that population and get that investment in this region. And hopefully with that comes a realization that we have to do a better job in terms of accommodating people, and frankly do a better job in architecture. I've always viewed San Diego as an architectural wasteland, principally because our weather is so good. Developers, my clients, don't have to ask their architects to build. I think it's as simple as this. They don't have to ask their architects to build good architecture because they're going to fill those buildings with people and offices and retail going forward with bad architecture and not spend a lot of money on it because the weather's so good. And that's what attracts people here. So that's a big challenge. When you walk on the High Line in New York City or anywhere else in big cities in America, you see much nicer, interesting, eccentric, game-changing architecture than you do here, and I'd certainly like to see a better future in that regard. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
I want to thank the panel. A couple of comments before I want to ask you some questions or get you involved in the conversation before we go to the audience. But you mentioned the architecture and what your developers do. Rich Louvre, columnist for the Union Tribune, used to call it the stucco wasteland. And that's a lot of what we build, which I want to raise a question about. If suburban development does occur, are we exacerbating problems, even though we're providing roast over people's heads? Not yet. And what is the suburban solution? If we really want to, we talk about building neighborhoods as well. One of my problems with what the city's doing, we're building a lot of housing, but we're not building neighborhoods. We're just building boxes, and maybe not the right kind of boxes. So how do we change some of that so that we do start to build neighborhoods? I also say that I disagree. I agree with Shakespeare, the past is prologue. All the issues we're talking about today, we've been talking about for the 40 years that Friends has been around, or many years that I've been around. Right. They just never go away. We just have to constantly work at it. Like you're building a personal relationship, you've got to work at these things in order to make sure you're doing something good or not so good. So I want to just ask the panel to react to each other. are we building the right kind of things? And what can we do to really refocus? I mentioned, we built things, and I mentioned earlier the wall we built between the waterfront and downtown with the convention center and the hotel. We have visions, we forget about the visions, we do things. Can we really sort of correct that? Megan talked a lot about community and people's, what came out of her session yesterday. Neighbors, communities don't feel that anybody's listening to them, or they have a voice in what happens to their neighborhood. How do we begin to address some of that? Howard is championed it.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for asking me the question. How? It's the rules. As Gary was saying and Megan was saying, the architecture is directly related to what's by right rules, which are embedded in the zoning ordinance from the 50s and the 60s. And the thing that's not happening is row houses and townhouses don't happen naturally in San Diego because our rules really create Huffman 6-packs that have now become 32-packs. It's the same, the frontages are still terrible because we don't value the street. We don't value the community is about streets and parks. That's the public spaces where we all come together with our private buildings and private buildings fronting onto streets. And therefore, when you go to a Paris or in New Orleans or an older place that fronts onto the street and shaped streets, you go, oh, this is great character. You come to San Diego and you see the shoulders of buildings with all of the public frontages going all the way to the alley. And so it's a matter of our rules. And our rules are bad, and we're just waiving rules to get affordable housing, but we're not waiving enough of the rules are too inherent, such as the minimum lot size and things of that nature, to turn towards the street and create that value. And then I just want to say lastly, because I don't need to speak again. The issue that changed that Gary described from the history is that the feds used to subsidize the people coming back from war. The GI Bill helped us. We had federal housing lending to help subsidize what we paid in taxes and what we paid in insurance for Prop 13. What we paid in California for homes was very, very cheap and subsidized. And then when we went to universities, my era is probably the last era of getting the GI Bill people, that all that federal money was supporting universities, and I had a very wonderful cheap education that today is all done by credit debt. And that's changed the most, and that's why I think universities need reform and housing needs reform, is because the feds are out of the game.
Yeah, I think so. A couple comments on that. Are we building right? Mike asked, and I think the answer is no. Like Howard said, we need to be building the more diverse housing supply. And then how, with the rules that you mentioned, I think one of the issues that we're seeing, or that I'm noticing, is that a lot of the developers are just not even paying attention to the rules. They're just paying away the fees to not do the things that we're putting into regulation, such as like complete communities. Everyone just pays a development fee to not do the public space that they're supposed to be doing, or they pay someone else to build their affordable housing 20 years from now or whenever they're going to do it, but they're not including it and doing it themselves. And then I think one of the things that we can do, I read an article recently in the New York Times and there was a comment that I really enjoyed, is that if we just looked at making a little bit less, so much of what I've seen in the industry and the development is when we've got all these people talking about how they've got to hit their bottom line and pencil out. It's like, well, you got to adjust what you're penciling for. And, if you just made a little bit less, you could maybe have a small.
You're talking about developer profits?
Yes.
I can assure you they're making less.
Okay. And then I think also hitting on how do we do better, I think it's us as a community, the people that are taught in this room, the people that we reach and talk to, all of us just doing a better job of advocating. And I think we're doing a little bit of that now, but we could all just keep doing a little bit more.
What was the question, Mike? Oh, I know. More neighborhoods make more livable zones. Well, listen, we actually have a recent tradition of doing some of that. My firm has been working on, for a number of years now, reinventing shopping centers into residentially dominated mixed-use projects. We just finished working on Mission Valley Center. We're going to have over 600 residential units there. It's not going to come out exactly how I wanted it to, but economics comes into play, and lack of courage and all this stuff. But it should be pretty neat. I didn't work on fashion, but we're adding 800 units there apparently over time. There's a remake of Horton Plaza. By the way, one of my predictions 40 years from now is the city council and mayor will still be at 202 C Street.
Right.
It should be. By the way, if you really want to make an impact in this community, pressure your city council and mayor to seriously consider moving everything over to Horton Plaza. It's a once in a generation opportunity to take 700,000 feet of office space and move the entire city offices over there and get rid of that rat hole, which was a rat hole when Mike and I worked, when I worked for Mike back there in 76 or 77. It's a travesty that the city didn't bid for that property, and the mayor is not behind it. And as much as I respect our mayor in terms of a lot of other things, he's not showing the courage just to move over there. I think there's just too much stuck in the budget crisis right now to understand the opportunity. And by the way, the idea of densifying through taking away minimum lot size, we did a study on that as part of our lobbying effort, and we think we can raise over $300 million in property taxes to the city to solve all their budget dilemmas if they just do that one little thing instead of raising parking fees here at Balboa Park. So I think that's something that we have to focus on. But I also will tell you that we're working on 3 projects right now that are old aggregate mining sites within or near the city of San Diego, where we are trying to do master planning of the sort that you're talking about, where we build neighborhoods. I cut my teeth by doing the feasibility studies in the late 70s, 80s, and 90s. I think of every project beginning with the name Rancho. I think I was responsible for the financial performance and market studies on all of these projects. And I haven't been in the Rancho business for a long time. We've been doing complicated mixed-use urban vertical projects in downtown and other places. But we are doing these big mining sites now where we have an opportunity to recreate master plan communities. So there is hope there. And I think when you look at, I don't mean to pick out Claremont, but Claremont was built back in the 50s and 60s to be cheap and ugly. And today it's cheap, ugly, and old. And,
Wait a minute.
the problem is when I make that comment, there's always someone in the audience who I dissed.
You live in
I do that just to provoke. That's it.
Yeah, I know.
Because I can pick on Sarah Mays, I can pick on so I guess the point is that there is hope. We are doing some of these things that you're advocating, Michael, but it's not happening as quick or as intelligently as I'd like to see it either.
So just a comment on the rat hole, is that, that is also a product of not investing in maintaining buildings that we have and spaces that we have. And I think that's something that as we move forward, there's great talk in other countries more than our country about a moratorium on building. And this has to do with carbon, this has to do with how much we have to contribute. And the idea of, instead of having to make a case for keeping a building, in certain, Finland and other, Nordic countries, which of course, there's various economic reasons why they can do this and we can't. But, you've got to make a case for why you can tear down a building. That tearing down a building is not the first course of action. And that is something that has been talked about in architecture circles and is increasingly talked about in architecture circles. So back to the rat hole, that has not been maintained. That has not been renovated since it was built.
Right.
It is designed, we have approached that building and those series of buildings as, dispensable, basically, that we will tear them down. And actually, having talked to someone who is involved in maintaining those buildings, you have to get the mayor to agree to do certain things to maintain it, just to
But
keep
you
it
really
running.
want to maintain that building?
You know what? I think we need to have a serious conversation about it. And I think the problem is that we are of a mind of the first step is get rid of it. Then step two, what are we gonna do in it? And I do think as we move forward, and we've got to look at how much concrete we are destroying and how much, what is dispensable and what isn't. And I think this goes back to historic preservation and the comment, just kind of the discussion about it. It's not necessarily about the building in particular, but there is a reason why it needs to be probably destroyed at this point. And that
I
has to
think
do
you're raising an important point about all of this, all of
money.
you. You don't start from, I'm gonna tear it down, or I'm gonna rehab it. You start looking at what you can do. The building has never been maintained. When I was there, when you were there even, we had rolls of duct tape, which we kept in the
60 years of duct
office,
tape.
because
Yeah.
that's how we did everything. But it can be looked at, it must be looked at first, even though I think moving City Hall to Horton Plaza is a good idea.
Well, let me just say this real quick. So, you're right, the reason why it sucks is because it's not beloved. It was built for economic purposes. C. Arnold Smith built it there behind the Marquee Hotel on Broadway, which was the big deal to help fill that hotel and his development. Horton Plaza was built for economic development, and it's getting an onion at the next Orchids and Onions Award because of its, right now it's derelict. But these are just economic models that like a strip mall, a shopping center, that now need to be changed and need to be rethought about. So I think your point's very, very good.
Well, Ernie Hahn said when they opened Horton Plaza, in 10 or 20 years, it's gonna be changed completely. And he just expected it. Huh? Well, anyway, let me see if there's any comments from the audience.
I'll bring a microphone, Stepner. I'll bring it to you. Here you go. Hello?
Thank you. I'm going to take my presidential privilege. I live in Claremont. I've lived in Claremont since 1975. And I like it because we're having our 75th birthday. October 18th, it's going to be at the first, I think, one of the very first shopping malls at the Claremont Square.
Yeah.
On Saturday, October 18th, so stop by. Everything is there. It's our San Diego's first real suburb, kind of.
See, but the point I was making is exactly your point, which is it's in the center of town. It's near transportation. It's near jobs. It's the very kind of place that you want to pay attention to.
Yeah, and we're changing a lot of the little defunct sort of strip malls are going to be housing, and you can step in and do some of that. We'd love to see it because we'd rather see that than 12 ADUs behind a single-family house on a canyon with no parking. So anyway, come to our 75th birthday party on October 18th, and Claremont is a good place because everything is there.
Woo! Will you pass it behind you two people when you're done?
So, one word I haven't heard at all today is homelessness. This is the longest time I've gone without hearing that word in a long time, for several hours.
True.
And I think it's really important for us to think about. We talk about losing the young folks who have to leave because they can't afford to live here. We should not forget that we have, as of today, 10,000 people are turning 65 every day for the next 19 years in America. That's like some 30, 40 million people. Half of them don't even have $60,000 in savings. So they're being forced out. So the loss of population here has a lot to do with those prices. And so how are we going to build? I see stuff going up, which from an urban design standpoint, I'm not sure I really like. But I also look at what we did, say, like Italy after the war, or France, where they're building huge buildings because they are in a crisis and they responded to it like a crisis. We're kind of responding to it like another problem we've got here. And I think that there's different standards we use. And while we should be doing better, let's not forget that people are dying on our streets because we haven't built enough housing.
Can I address that?
Behind you, two people.
I just want, Mike alluded to that when he talked about SROs earlier, because we've destroyed a lot of the SROs with downtown redevelopment, a huge amount of them, and that was the repository for a lot of that population. When I drove here this morning, I went by all the tents that are the south side of the park here. That's not the solution. And I will tell you from a development perspective, SROs have historically garnered more dollar per square foot in revenue because they're small. Even though they don't pay a lot, the revenue per square foot is really high. Developers could build those things again if the city allowed them to do it.
Yeah.
And that's one. It's not the only solution. There's all kinds of social solutions.
It's
That's
illegal
one
in the
thing.
downtown community.
Exactly. It
Yeah.
shouldn't be.
Go ahead.
I have a teacher's voice, so I'm okay with that.
Okay.
So you mentioned townhomes. I'm absolutely an advocate of townhomes. Townhomes have a front yard, townhomes have a backyard. That dream of, the American dream of owning a home. You picture a front yard, you picture a backyard where your kids can play. Is there any chance that here in this area, we can ever bring the mindset around to those folks who moved to Riverside or moved to Imperial because they want a single family home to raise a family? Is there anything we can do here to help folks realize that if they get row houses or townhouses, I'm not saying it has to be like Linda Vista. Post-war Linda Vista was great. But what can we do to change the mindset and let people know that row houses really can be a single family dwelling?
Yeah.
You want to talk about references, then I'm going to talk about alternative.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
That'd be interesting. Because I'm probably not nearly as creative as you are. But the idea behind the row home was to recognize the fact that in what we all call in economics the factors of production, which are land, labor, materials, and capital. Those are the factors that go into the cost of a house. By far, land is the most important cost component. You go into the coastal markets, land is responsible for like 80% of the value of a house. You can see that up in Palisades that burned down. You know, those lots are flipping because for almost not for 70-80% of the price that they would have flipped for if the house was still on those lands. So land matters. So what we're proposing is, and I owned a row home for many years, happened to be in downtown San Diego East Village. I just sold it. I owned it for over 20 years. It was a 2,000-foot home, no front yard, well, small little front yard, no backyard, just balconies, 2,000-foot, three-story home on 700 feet of land. So what I'm saying is when you go to the Claremonts and the Serra Mesas and the Linda Vistas and sort of the old suburban ring of San Diego, you already have the infrastructure in place for families. You've got the parks and the schools and all the in the streets and all that stuff. You're not going to create the kind of civic stress that you normally create with vertical high-rise projects, and you're not taking up land by building backyards. And so that's sort of where I'm coming from. That may be a different place, or maybe just small backyard. What we are thinking, what we do want to make sure of is that there's a parking garage with every one of these units.
Just to clarify, sir, yes, when I say backyard, I'm talking about a small backyard.
Right.
If the row home is, let's say, 18 feet wide, that the backyard then is maybe an 18 by 18
Got it.
yard.
So can I ask, how many people here live in houses that have too many bedrooms that you don't need anymore? No, because I mean, I do think this is another issue, right? Is the fact that as families change and as people grow out and, you know, go to college and all these sorts of things, there is not just in our city, obviously, or our state, but across the country, is that there are family-sized homes in good school districts that are not, you know, if we want to talk utilized for the best perspective, whatever, but they are families that have been there and do not want to move for very good reason, you know, the community that is there, etc. But it is oversized for who lives there now. And because of the financial implications of that, is that you are not able to sell, even if people are interested in selling and moving into a smaller space elsewhere in a more urban environment that you can walk to and you don't need a car and all these things. the economics of it absolutely do not make sense. And I think for San Diego, as well as others, that is a huge issue. Is that we've got great school districts that families cannot get into because there is not houses available to be in there.
And by the way,
And vice versa.
I've talked to a
You can't
couple,
leave.
I talked to a couple of the electeds on the school board over the last month, and their big crisis is they're not able, they're losing students for all the reasons that you cited.
They're shut down at school and going home.
Yeah, no, exactly. And as someone who lives in North Park, I was able to buy, for a variety of special family helping financial reasons and having an ADU and everything, but on my street, the only reason why my house was up for sale was because the widow wanted to move to Arizona to be closer to family and could make it happen. Every other house on the street is a legacy house that has been owned by the same family for now 2 or 3 generations onward. So there are homes available of a certain size for families in these desirable areas. They are not available as well.
Just to clarify the question, because I'm not sure exactly what you're saying. Why is it not feasible for them to sell their house and downsize?
So I think the main obstacle is capital gains tax. The minor obstacle is cyclical things like, I can't get the price for my house, or those kind of things. The main obstacle is Prop 13, keep my property taxes down. And if the capital gains tax went away, or got very much minimized, you'd see a whole lot more dynamic return.
So, I guess this is on, I'm not sure. So thanks, Mike and the panel. Lots to unpack here. These are just a couple of comments and then a question. Smokestacks and geraniums, that was earlier on. Temporary paradise, it's interesting. I consider we're still in a temporary paradise because people can't stay here. And so they come, they make their money, and then they move out, or it's a temporary paradise for those that, who pointed out there's empty houses, empty apartments and condos downtown and in La Jolla. I came here in 1975. I was 29. The city's population was 750,000. It's now 50 years later. I felt when I got here at that size, it was a city that I could move into and make a difference. And now we're, 1.4 million? The county is 3.2 million. So the question is there a manageable size of a city where individuals who are graduating from architecture school or moving here for the first time can actually fall, you used the word ethos, and I had written it down earlier, to become part of the ethos of the city and to be able to make a difference so that the city's size is such that you don't lose your humanity as we grow to AI, robot cars, etc. Is there an optimum size for a city? Is he gone? City council? When I came here in 75, there was 8 council districts, maybe 6 to 8 for 750,000 people. We're 1.4 and we have 9 council districts. So is there the representation that's needed? It's a bunch of questions and a bunch of comments.
I think the point you're making is that there's not one solution. Changing the zoning is not the solution for peace in the Mideast. We have to work on all of these things to really address the need.
I know the solution for peace in the Mideast.
To Megan's point, I have kids that come back all the time to visit, but I can't afford to sell my house. I bought my house almost 40-some years ago. If I sell it now, I can't afford to go anywhere unless I move to Arizona, and God knows I don't want to do anything like that. So how do we address that? How do we think about some of these things? Gary mentioned the small lot, going to smaller lots. The 50-foot by 100-foot lot was not codified as the official lot size until the early 80s. We really, and if you look at the older neighborhoods in San Diego, 50 by 50 lot size, 25 by 100, full of that. You look at, I live in Mission Hills, multifamily developments on 50 by 100 foot lots, scattered throughout. That was the trend. The thing that Megan also talked about, during World War II, people who had extra bedrooms rented them out to people who were in the defense industry or the military or whatever involved in war work. We encourage that. Is that something that's also a model that's being talked about today? Is can you, as a senior, rent part of your house out to juniors and to help you take care of things? And we have, so we have to really address it. And we're getting late, and I want to ask Bruce Applegard I'll bring in my tea because you're late on this, but because temporary paradise was something that is more relevant today than I think it was 50 years ago, and it doesn't provide any guidance. So I'm going to give you.
Okay. Thanks, Mike. I just want to mention I have copies of the commemorative edition of Temporary Paradise that for purchase to support the Sustainable Paradise Scholarship Fund that we created at San Diego State. And sorry. So just some quick notes about Temporary Paradise. It was 50 years old. It was really the first regional urban design plan. It served as a timeless, transcendent, transformative vision for our transnational region, simultaneously serving as a roadmap to communicate our region's best ideas through a poetic voice and engaging imagery. It also talked about creating a zone of confluence on our border to share our culture, our economies, and our environment. It had several key areas: valleys and canyons, the seacoast, getting about, growth, existing communities, major centers, the Mexican connection, and the environment. For valleys and canyons, it talked about really preserving the canyons, and that led to the multiple species preservation ordinance and other things. For the seacoast, they talked about building to the sea, but not blocking the coast, but not blocking the views. And when they talked about getting about, they talked about they envisioned the light rail line, and talked about traveling light through buses, through bicycling, through walking. And they also talked about agglomerating around transit stations, so building up around transit stations. And this was 20 years before the idea of transit-oriented development really came through, adopted by Peter Calthorpe. I think in a lot of ways it happened because Mike Stepner, who has always been such a champion of temporary paradise, gave Peter Calthorpe all of the material to come up with the idea of transit-oriented development. They talked about containing suburban growth, but I think for political reasons, they talked about not stopping it entirely. And they conducted surveys of Mission Valley, coming with arguing for several things: not cement line the river, to do better pedestrian connections, and also create many more paseos and wonderful buildings. For existing communities, they came up with guidelines from everything from buildings to the street. They talked about how communities should be involved, but they shouldn't drive the process because they weren't really capable of thinking regionally about the environment or equity issues. They also came up with an environmental plan for San Diego, which proposed urban design operations for the city and the organizations like Sandag. And they also talked about having an urban design process in both the city and Sandag. All this also, talking about creating a zone of confluence around the border, has inspired me to write the Declaration of Independence for San Diego Tijuana. And I want to just thank the panel for all your great comments today.
Thanks. You want to make one?
Yeah, just one real quick point. Gary, it always brings a smile to my face when I see academia and personal experiences kind of merge together and justify one another. Where you're talking about with the cars and how we travel and commute. Alvin Toffler's The Third Wave is basically my Bible, and what you were saying is in line, almost carbon copy.
I knew him personally.
I mean, you have personally?
I knew him a couple times.
That's amazing. Yeah, I'm a very big fan of his, so I really appreciate what you were saying, and it brought a smile to my face. My question actually, Megan, is geared a little bit more towards you, and based on what both you and Mike Cintron were suggesting. My students, unfortunately, also have gone through that same realization that they don't want to stay in San Diego. As soon as they graduated, half my class already left. So what you guys are saying is not so much as a one-time instance, it's a habit that's been forming. You also mentioned that the architecture schools have been dwindling over time. They've been shutting down, and the one private school that we have, I don't know any of the personal numbers or anything, but from my subjective experience of someone who graduated from new school, I've noticed that the number of students have also been going down as well. So even that's been choking out. In an ideal state, when we have the proper funding, where do you see academia going for the next step? So we can plant the proper seeds for the next generation of architects to take San Diego in the right way that we're all in agreement of.
Well, first of all, part of the issue is proper funding and the cost of higher education, and especially, unfortunately, for architecture, your return on investment for that education. That's also like kind of the worst class I have at professional practice was this is how much you're gonna make when you get out, and the look on everyone's faces. And especially since so many of my students were, are first generation students that went through the community college system, and that's a lot of money, and they're not going to make that back. I think we're in a higher education crisis just in general. And that's true UCSD, that's true for all the schools that don't have architecture programs. I think, the answer that is emerging locally is the community colleges are getting into the game of the architecture education. Now, that architecture education so far is slated to look very different than other forms of architecture education because of the funding, because of the way that those schools are structured, how education's delivered. I think it's hard to know. I, as a member of this transborder group, because also education in Tijuana is a whole different can of worms of issues, much cheaper, but too many students in classes to deliver an architecture education that we recognize in the States. So a lot of the work that we do is providing other forms of workshops and education so everyone gets a more balanced kind of regionally based education. I don't know what the answer is. I think alternative models need to be developed. They're being developed elsewhere. It'd be great to have that available here. And that is something that I am personally working toward, but it's tricky. I think ultimately in education though, much like housing and all these other things, we will continue to have the have and the have-nots. People that can afford to live in North Park will have amazing, I walk my kids to school 10 minutes away. I walk to the gym 13 minutes away, so 3 minutes on. I work from home, or if I drive to USD, it's really not that far. I have an amazing quality of life. I run across my neighbors on the street. We all know each other. The Girl Scouts are all at Morley Field right now having a hike that I'm gonna join. So if you can get into that, and just like the education system, I think USD is developing a really great program. It's expensive. And then the alternative we'll have other versions that are just different, and you're driving an hour and a half to get to work, and you're not seeing your kids because you spend 3 hours in traffic, and you're at our community college with a studio of 100 people. We are developing that system has already been developed and will continue to be developed. I just hope that we are able to have new alternatives and new ways of thinking about it that can kind of start to make inroads in that.
All right, thank you. Just quick comment on the education and architecture students in particular. I'm a licensing advisor for Southern California, so I'm really tied into how people get licensed essentially, and how we create new architects and a new generation of people in this industry. I will say in the past few years, we've made great inroads into adding alternative ways of getting to become a licensed architect. And so I'm very optimistic about the future of that and architectural education and where that's going. I think we're opening up a lot of opportunities for people to join this industry.
Thank you for those comments. I just want to say I'm glad there's 4 architects from the school in this room that are still in town, so that's good. Not everybody is left. I want to thank the panel for the discussion, comments. I think this is great. Something to think about We're always at a crossroads in San Diego, every city is, and we're always changing, we're evolving, and it's a constant battle. And you really have to work at it on a regular basis. People have to be engaged and to see something happen. So I want to thank the panel. Next month, one of the things that Gary mentioned was Horton Plaza at City Hall. Come here in October, I'm not sure the date, but we'll get a notice out. You'll be able to talk about that because Betsy Brennan from the Downtown Partnership will be here to talk about their concourse work and what that means and what is the possibility really of Horton Plaza fulfilling that role. And while we can rehab the old City Hall, it has to be changed.
But that parking garage is so nice. Come on.
Yeah.
That's so good. Just keep the parking. Which I is weird to say.
We'll save the parking garage for you.
It's weird to say that, but.
But thank the panel. Thank you all.